Being a police officer is one of the most difficult professions. In this video, we share 5 harrowing stories of officers who made the ultimate sacrifice while on duty. From routine traffic stops that turned fatal to sudden ambushes on dark streets, these tragic tales highlight the profound risks and bravery associated with law enforcement. It was September 19, 2004. Senior patrol agents Travis W. Attaway, Jeremy Wilson, and Javier Sandoval were conducting a routine patrol of the Rio Grande River, the way they had done many times before. But the river was different that day. It was unusually swollen and harder to navigate. Still, the 3 men were experienced. Like any other agent, they knew the job came with inherent risks. They didn't know, however, that this would be their last mission for 2 of them. At 31 years old, Travis Wayne Attaway was a serious agent. Besides his work on boats, he often participated in bike and horse patrols. As for Jeremy Wilson, he was 29 years old and a third-generation Border Patrol agent who was inspired to pursue this career by both his father and his grandfather. Both Travis and Jeremy were hard-charging, dedicated agents. They were also both in their 7th year on the job. They knew the river better than anyone, but water can be treacherous, especially in changing weather conditions. It had rained the previous day, raising the water level by a foot. Current speeds were measured at about 5,000 gallons a second. These were harsher conditions and had to be handled carefully, especially since the Rio Grande River was and still is one of the Border Patrol's most dangerous assignments. That Sunday, September 19th, 2 boats were sent downstream from Los Indos, Texas, because something had activated a sensor. Travis, Jeremy, and Javier were on one of the 2 boats, a lightweight 19-foot Predator model. They maneuvered the boat toward a weir on the extremely high river. The water seemed furious, almost alive. Once they approached the weir, Travis Attaway and Jeremy Wilson positioned themselves at the front of the boat. They each had poles, which they used to check for shallow areas or submerged objects. Around 2:40 p.m., the situation took a dramatic turn. The boat was caught in an eddy, causing Jeremy Wilson to lose his footing and fall into the water. Reacting quickly, Javier Sandoval cut off the motor, but the following events happened in a blur. Travis Attaway, determined to save Jeremy from drowning, removed his 21-pound duty belt and grabbed a rope, throwing it to Jeremy. Suddenly, the boat began to fill with water and capsized instantly. The 3 men fought to stay afloat as the crew from a second boat noticed their struggle and rushed to assist. However, the river's current was relentless, and the second boat nearly capsized as well. They managed, however, to rescue Sandoval, who had clung to debris to stay afloat before the other crew could reach him, and struggled to remove his boots and belt to dispose of unnecessary weight that could have hindered his attempts at staying afloat. But there was no sign of Travis Attaway or Jeremy Wilson. To make things worse, both men wore long pants. One had cowboy boots and the other had tactical boots laced up, making them difficult to remove. It seemed that all odds were against them. Several local, state, and federal agencies conducted an extensive 10-mile search for the men, even dragging parts of the riverbed. Mexican forces also contributed by searching the river's southern side. The search took 2 days. By the time the bodies were found, everybody knew this wasn't a rescue operation but a recovery mission. Travis Attaway's body was found on September 21st, 2004, at around 1:30 a.m. Jeremy Wilson's body floated up at approximately 3 a.m. the same day. Both bodies were found near the accident site, with officials concluding that a dam submerged by unusually high waters had created a whirlpool effect that had been likely trapping the bodies. The currents carried the lightweight 19-foot Predator model boat over 4 miles downstream before it was recovered. By the time it was retrieved, the river had stripped everything except the motor and steering wheel. The 2 agents were deemed heroes by the U.S. Border Patrol. They were honored in August 2022 when the U.S. Border Patrol Rio Grande Valley sector named patrol vessels after them posthumously. On the evening of Monday, December 17, 2018, Officer Conrad Gary and Officer Eduardo Marmolejo responded to a shots-fired call. The call was triggered by a ShotSpotter sensor, a technology used by the city of Chicago, Illinois, to detect gunfire. That evening, gunfire was detected on Chicago's far south side. The 2 officers rushed to the scene, not knowing they were rushing to meet a cruel fate. At 31 years old, Conrad Gary was the kind of officer everyone could depend on. Despite being a rookie with just 18 months on the force, Conrad had an innate ability to navigate both crisis and chaos. He was a born protector. At 36 years old, Eduardo Marmolejo was also relatively new to the Chicago Police Department, with 2.5 years of experience. Eduardo had dedicated his life to public service. Before joining CPD, he worked tirelessly in a hospital. Both men exemplified commitment and bravery in their service to the community. Both officers were level-headed and quick to answer the call on that fateful evening. They arrived at the scene shortly before 6 p.m. and parked their patrol car near the train tracks at 103rd Street and Cottage Grove Avenue. According to body cam footage, Conrad and Eduardo exited their patrol car and started walking towards the train tracks. They were completely focused on their task. They discussed the possible direction in which the suspect might have fled, which way made the most sense, or why. Their body camera footage recorded their movements and words as they closed in. It was already dark outside. Chasing an individual with a gun is always one of the most, if not the most, dangerous things any police officer can do. The two officers were indeed in danger, but not because of the armed man. As they talked and tried to decide on a course of action, the situation escalated, adding another level of chaos. A loud northbound train arrived and passed. Conrad and Eduardo continued their pursuit along the tracks. But as they did so, they were completely unaware of their impending doom. The noise from the northbound train drowned out the sound of the southbound train approaching rapidly. Conrad and Eduardo were on the tracks. The body camera went black in an instant. The train screeched and came to a halt. But it was too late. Officer Conrad Gary and Officer Eduardo Marmolejo were both dead, killed by the train. The power went off on the train. Visibly shaken, the conductor told riders there was an emergency. Train workers searched the tracks with flashlights. Early Tuesday morning, 2 ambulances carried the bodies from the scene. With full police honors, the 15-mile procession passed by the 5th Police District, where the officers were stationed, before proceeding to the medical examiner's office, where officers saluted in a show of respect. According to an investigation, the train that hit and killed the 2 officers was traveling at a speed of about 65 miles per hour. There was no indication that the officers saw the southbound train coming, most likely because of the auditory shield created by the northbound train. Both Conrad Gary and Eduardo Marmolejo were devoted young fathers. Conrad was a loving husband and the father of an infant, while Eduardo was a dedicated husband and father of 3 children. Amid the overwhelming sorrow of their tragic loss, there was a small measure of closure when the suspect was eventually apprehended and a weapon was recovered. Their sacrifice remains a poignant reminder of the dangers those who serve and protect face. February 2nd, 2023. Started as a regular shift for Officer Julian Becerra of the Fountain Police Department. But it was about to turn into a deadly nightmare. Julian, a 35-year-old U.S. Air Force veteran and experienced K-9 officer, was called to assist the Department of Corrections in tracking 3 carjacking suspects. The suspects, Devin Bobian, Anthony Vallejos, and Danisha Pacheco, were already known to be dangerous. Bobian, the most destructive of the trio, was a 4-time convicted felon and an escapee on the run. Around 5:30 p.m., officers spotted the stolen Hyundai near North Academy Boulevard and Platt Avenue. The chase began, a dizzying pursuit through the streets of Pueblo, Colorado. The suspects drove recklessly, speeding the wrong way down lanes, endangering everyone around them. It was clear that Bobian and his crew would stop at nothing to escape. The suspects stopped at a Love's Travel Center in Fountain. Abandoning the Hyundai, they set their sight on a silver Toyota 4Runner. Bobian approached the owner, a woman just about to pump gas. He took out his gun, threatening the woman and demanding her car keys. But the woman was extremely brave in the face of such danger. She called his bluff and refused to comply. Even more, she began walking away before confronting the carjackers, telling them to get out of her vehicle. By then, police were closing in. There was no time for the suspects to steal the woman's car. They rushed back to their stolen Hyundai, tearing away from the scene. The pursuit continued. It was like something out of an action movie, but the stakes were very real. People's lives were at risk. By 8 p.m., the Fountain Police Department executed a tactical vehicle intervention. pinning the Hyundai between two police cars on a bridge near South Academy Boulevard and South Hartford Street in Colorado Springs. 35-year-old Officer Julian Becerra was ready to do his duty and end the dangerous chase. He stepped out of his car, prepared to do what had to be done and arrest the suspects. But the situation escalated when Devin Beaubien, desperate and dangerous, exited the Hyundai. Instead of making a run for it, Beaubien climbed onto the roof of the stolen car and leaped onto Julian's vehicle. Julian found himself trapped between his vehicle and the bridge guardrail. It was a difficult position, and Beaubien made everything much worse for the officer. Instead of fleeing, the man turned his attention to Julian. He stood over the officer, staring at him menacingly, and then leaned forward in a threatening, deranged gesture. Julian was taken by surprise. Instantly, he lost his balance and tumbled over the guardrail, plummeting 40 feet from the bridge. Devin Beaubien decided it was time to flee the scene. He attempted to run, but with one of their own injured, the police were determined not to let him escape. Despite his struggles and attempts to crawl towards the edge of the bridge to jump, the officers managed to detain him. Beaubien was eventually stopped and taken into custody. Julian Becerra died on February 11, 2023. Devin Beaubien was found guilty of Julian Becerra's death and faced charges including second-degree murder, vehicular eluding, motor vehicle theft, weapon possession by a previous offender, and 2 counts of aggravated robbery. It was the night of Thursday, January 27, 1972. NYPD officers Rocco Laurie and Gregory Foster were out, walking their usual beat on Avenue B and East 11th Street in the 9th Precinct of New York. They had just answered a call about a domestic dispute, but that case was over, and Rocco and Greg were heading back to their precinct. It was a cold and cloudy night. Snow was coming, and the air was damp and frigid, but a little cold wasn't going to frighten the 2 officers. Rocco and Greg were best friends. They were former Marines who had served together in Vietnam. After that chapter of their lives had ended, the men had requested to be partners, patrolling the streets of what was then regarded as one of New York's most dangerous neighborhoods. They were young men. Rocco Laurie was 23, while Greg Foster was 22. Both of them were married, with wives who feared for their safety. Both of them were dedicated officers. Greg had always wanted to be a cop, while Rocco decided on this career path after realizing college wasn't for him. It was around 10:30 p.m. Rocco and Greg were walking south along Avenue B. That's when they noticed something they deemed worth checking. They saw a car parked in front of a hydrant. They decided to enter a luncheonette across the street. Maybe the owner of the place knew the car. When asked, the man went outside to see the vehicle but said he hadn't seen it before. This prompted Rocco and Greg to leave the small restaurant and resume their walk to the precinct. The 2 of them needed to learn what was coming for them. Up until then, the night had been relatively quiet. The 2 officers began walking back north, giving little notice to the 3 men that passed them, parting to allow Rocco and Greg to walk between them. What happened next is regarded by history as New York's most brutal cop killing. Just a few seconds after 23-year-old Officer Rocco Laurie and 22-year-old Officer Gregory Foster passed, the 3 men turned and drew pistols. One of them had a .38 automatic, while the other 2 each had 9mm automatics. Rocco and Greg continued walking, unaware of the imminent danger. They had taken only a few steps when the first bullet struck them from behind. Greg Foster was hit 8 times, collapsing to the pavement, unmoving. Rocco Laurie was shot 6 times. 5 bullets tore through his arms and legs, and the final bullet pierced his neck. Overwhelmed by the shock, Rocco clutched at his throat, then fell to his knees and collapsed to his side. It was a terrifying picture. 2 men pierced by bullets, their blood spreading across the pavement, their killers calmly marching toward them. The killers weren't done. One of them encouraged the others to continue shooting. Once again, they opened fire, their silhouettes looming over the fallen officers. The men fired 3 bullets into Gregory Foster's eyes and 2 more into Rocco Laurie's groin. They only left, running to their vehicle, a Chrysler, after stealing the officers' guns and doing a blood-chilling victory dance. The first officers to respond arrived quickly on the scene, their police sirens echoing through the neighborhood. Rocco Laurie was still alive despite being gravely injured. Streets were closed, civilians were kept at bay, and Rocco was transported to the hospital, but nothing could be done. He died shortly after. As for Gregory Foster, he was already dead by the time help arrived. His blood and brain matter formed a puddle around his body. In 1972, the United States was a tumultuous landscape. Numerous militant groups sought to trigger systemic change, operating through secret underground cells, with the belief that violence was the only path to a better future. These groups fought for civil rights and an end to the Vietnam War, driven by a desire for a violent revolution to reshape society. Fingerprints found in the getaway car suggested the assassins were Ronald Carter, Twyman Myers, and at least one other man. All three of them were known members of the Black Liberation Army, an organization police believed responsible for another series of police attacks in New York 8 months before. Ronald Carter, one of the suspects, was shot and killed in a gun battle with police in St. Louis, Missouri, on February 14, 1972. Police found Rocco Lori's pistol at the scene. Twyman Myers, another suspect, died in the Bronx after a shootout with police. The last suspect, a man called Henry Shaw Brown, was arrested, extradited to New York, and charged with 2 counts of murder, but was acquitted in 1973. Subsequently, he was returned to Missouri and sentenced to 25 years in prison for his involvement in the St. Louis incident. On July 9, 2007, Officer Russell Timoshenko and his partner, Officer Herman Yan, patrolled Crown Heights, a neighborhood in Brooklyn, New York, in their marked 71st Precinct police car. Russell Timoshenko, who was 23 years old, was in the passenger seat. At that point, he had been with the force for about 18 months. As such, he was still a rookie, but already a dedicated cop. It was around 2:30 a.m. when Russell and Herman noticed a 2003 black BMW SUV heading westbound on Lefferts Avenue. For unknown reasons, the two officers decided to run the license plate. Maybe they had a hunch, or it was only routine. However, the license plate returned as registered to an entirely different car, a 2007 Mitsubishi Outlander, not the black BMW in front of them. Suspecting foul play, Russell Timoshenko and Yan signaled the driver to pull over. The driver complied, turning north onto Rogers Avenue. Both officers exited their vehicle and approached the BMW, with Timoshenko approaching from the passenger side and Yan from the driver's side. Unbeknownst to them, there were 3 dangerous men inside the black BMW. All of them had violent criminal records and were determined to avoid returning to prison. Dexter Bostic, who was in the passenger seat, had served 9 years for assault, robbery, and sodomy in 1990, and 3 years for armed robbery in 2001. Robert Ellis, who sat in the back seat, had been convicted of first-degree sexual assault and sodomy at 19. Lee Woods, the driver, had served time for illegal weapons possession and assaulting a police officer. Only a day before, the 3 men had opened fire on an innocent man, shattering his femur, and then stole $1,800 in cash, a chain, and the keys to the man's vehicle. They were unpredictable and violent. As 23-year-old Officer Russell Timoshenko made his way to the BMW, Dexter Bostic waited for the right time. When Russell got close enough, Bostic opened fire with a .45 caliber handgun. 2 bullets struck Russell, one in the face and one in the throat. He collapsed to the ground. Simultaneously, from the back seat, Robert Ellis shot Herman Yan with a 9mm handgun, hitting him in the arm and chest. Herman's ballistic vest saved his life. He returned fire, but the 3 suspects fled the scene. They abandoned the BMW on Kingston Avenue, approximately 4 blocks from where the shooting occurred. Russell Timoshenko was rushed to Kings County Hospital Center, but his injuries were severe. The bullets had severely damaged his spinal cord, leaving him unable to breathe on his own or move his muscles. He went without oxygen for 15 to 20 minutes due to initial paralysis, which eventually led to a coma. Police apprehended one of the suspects, Leo Woods, on July 10, 2007. Woods identified Bostic and Ellis as his accomplices, claiming he was unaware they would open fire on the officers. In the meantime, Dexter Bostic and Robert Ellis did their best to escape. They hitchhiked across Long Island and took a ferry to Bridgeport, Connecticut. From there, they drove west to Pennsylvania. They planned to hide in a forest. The suspects were eventually spotted near Interstate 80 by a passing motorist who alerted the police. Authorities quickly arrived, causing the men to flee. A state trooper tackled Bostic, but Ellis managed to escape. He was apprehended the next morning. Both men were extradited to New York on July 12th. But nothing could be done for Officer Russell Timoshenko. Despite being placed on life support, tests on July 14th revealed no brain activity. He was pronounced dead at 4:14 p.m. when doctors turned off the respirator. Tens of thousands of people attended his funeral. Bostic and Woods received life sentences without parole for the murder, while Ellis was cleared of murder but convicted on weapon charges.